Have you ever wondered what would happen if someone dared to tear down everything we believe in? One man did, and paid for it with his sanity. Friedrich Nietzsche, the genius who shook the foundations of civilization, declared, "God is gone!" and plunged into the abyss to find new meaning. His life was a scandal, riddled with chilling secrets, from a tormenting illness that devoured his body, to a love that shattered his heart, to a haunting moment with a horse that drove him to madness. He promised us the Superman, but what lay behind his audacious ideas? And why does his truth terrify us? Today, we'll uncover the shocking details of his life and philosophy that will flip your understanding of the world upside down. But stay until the end. The most mind-blowing secret awaits in the finale, and it'll change everything you thought you knew about yourself. Don't switch away. This is a journey you won't forget. Imagine a world where the pillars of faith, morality, and meaning crumble, leaving nothing but a void. A world where one man dares to step into that void, not to mourn the loss, but to forge a new path, a path that challenges everything you've been taught. That man was Friedrich Nietzsche, a philosopher whose ideas didn't just question the status quo, they set it ablaze, predicting the collapse of Western culture and offering a vision so bold it still shakes us today. His voice echoes through time, daring us to ask, who are you, really? And do you have the courage to become that person? But how did a boy raised in a small Prussian village, surrounded by hymns and prayers, become the one to proclaim the end of old truths? To understand, we must start at the beginning, where the seeds of his rebellion were sown in a childhood marked by tragedy and faith. In 1844, Friedrich Nietzsche was born in Aachen, a quiet town in Prussia, now part of Eastern Germany. His father, Karl Ludwig, was the local Lutheran pastor, a man whose life revolved around sermons, scripture, and the promise of divine love. The Nietzsche household was modest but warm, filled with the sounds of organ music and the scent of old books. Young Friedrich, or Fritz as his family called him, grew up in a world where everything seemed certain. Goodness was rewarded, evil was punished, and God watched from above, guiding every step. But this certainty was fragile, like glass waiting to shatter. When Friedrich was just 4 years old, his father, the pastor whose words about God's mercy filled the church each Sunday, fell ill. It wasn't just any illness. It was a devastating condition that attacked his mind, plunging him into agony. For a year, the boy watched as his father, the cornerstone of his world, withered in pain. No prayers, no faith could stop the nightmare. In 1849, Karl Ludwig passed away, leaving the family in a silence no sermon could fill. The blows didn't stop there. A year later, Friedrich's younger brother, Ludwig, also passed, a toddler barely beginning to live. For a 5-year-old Friedrich, these losses weren't just grief, they were a question he couldn't yet articulate, a crack in the foundation of his world. If God existed, why did he allow such pain? Why did good people, like his father, suffer without reason? These questions, still vague, still unspoken, planted the first seeds of doubt that would later grow into a philosophy that changed the world. He grew up in a home where faith was the air he breathed, but that air grew heavier, harder to inhale. His mother, Franziska, tried to hold the family together, raising Friedrich and his sister Elizabeth in strict religious traditions, but the shadow of tragedy loomed large. His childhood was quiet, almost somber. He was a serious, introspective boy who preferred books and music to the rough games of his peers. He wrote poetry, played the piano, but even in these creative bursts, there was a hint of longing, as if he were searching for answers he didn't yet know how to find. School revealed Friedrich as more than just bright, he was a prodigy. He mastered languages, history, and theology with ease, standing out among his classmates. His teachers noticed his rare ability to see beyond the surface, to ask questions that made even them uneasy. Yet, even as he seemed destined to follow his father's path as a pastor, a tension grew within him. The faith meant to be his bedrock began to fracture. He studied sacred texts, But instead of comfort, he found contradictions. He listened to sermons, but instead of answers, he heard hollow words. The gap between what he was taught and what he saw, pain, injustice, chaos, widened. Still, he pressed on, driven by a hunger for knowledge that became his way of grappling with the emptiness taking root in his soul. When the time came for university, Friedrich chose the University of Bonn to study theology, a logical step for a pastor's son. He was ready to walk the path laid out for him, but something else stirred inside. At Bonn, he plunged into a world of ideas, new, bold, dangerous. He read critics of Christianity, like David Strauss, who questioned the divinity of Jesus. He attended lectures that challenged everything he knew. After just one semester, something broke, or perhaps was born. Friedrich Nietzsche, the boy raised on prayers, renounced his faith. It wasn't just an intellectual choice. It was a severance from his past, his family, his former self. He felt exposed, stripped of the shell that had shielded him from the world. But in that vulnerability, he found freedom, the freedom to ask questions no one dared voice. This rejection of theology didn't mean Nietzsche turned away from truth. Instead, he dove deeper, with a fervor that bordered on obsession. He transferred to the University of Leipzig to study philology, the science of language and its history. It was his way of digging beneath the surface, seeking meaning not in the heavens but in the words humans used to describe their world. At Leipzig, he shone. His essays on ancient Greek texts stunned professors with their precision and originality. He wasn't just a student, he was an explorer, seeing in language a reflection of the human spirit. But even here, in the academic world, he felt out of place. His questions were too vast, too daring for lecture halls. He didn't want to merely study the past. He wanted to understand how to live in a present where old truths no longer held. This quest led him to his first philosophical musings. He began reading Schopenhauer, whose grim view of suffering as life's core captivated and repelled him. He listened to Wagner's music, sensing in it a power words couldn't capture. In this swirling chaos of ideas, he started asking, if faith no longer provides answers, if suffering is inevitable, where do we find meaning? This question became his guiding star, his curse, and his salvation. He didn't yet know that his life would become a battle to answer it, a battle that would lead him to the heights of thought and the edge of madness. And so he stands at the threshold of a new path. Young, full of doubts, but with a fire in his eyes. He's not yet the Nietzsche the world will quote centuries later. He's just a man who refused easy answers and chose to seek his own. But what lies ahead? What trials will make his voice resonate so loudly it reaches those who don't want to hear? And how will a boy who lost his father and faith become the one to challenge an entire civilization? To find out, we must move forward, into the fire where his ideas begin to take shape and his life becomes a mirror of his philosophy. Picture a young man, barely in his mid-20s, standing at a crossroads that could define his life. He could choose the safe path, study, build a career, live within the comfort of tradition. But instead, he chooses rebellion, not loud or showy, but deep, internal, the kind that begins with rejecting everything he's been taught. Friedrich Nietzsche, having just cast aside the faith of his childhood, is on the brink of a new existence. He's no longer the pastor's son, no longer the obedient student, but a seeker whose questions are too big for lecture halls or church walls. His mind burns, his soul searches, but the path he chooses is fraught with not just discovery, but pain. How did this young man, riddled with doubts, become one of the boldest minds of his era? And what drove him to abandon everything for ideas the world wasn't ready to hear? At the University of Leipzig, Nietzsche threw himself into philology with the same passion he once poured into theology. He dissected ancient Greek texts, uncovering not just words but traces of human desires, fears, and dreams. His essays on Homer and Hesiod dazzled professors. They saw not just a student, but a future titan of scholarship. Yet for Nietzsche, philology was a means, not an end. He was chasing answers to questions that haunted him since childhood. Why do people suffer? Why is the world so unjust? If faith fails, what can take its place? These questions churned in his mind like a storm, and he felt the academic world growing too small to contain them. He wanted not just to study the past but to grapple with how to live in a present where old certainties were crumbling. His brilliance didn't go unnoticed. In 1869, at just 24, Nietzsche received an offer that seemed too good to refuse, a professorship in classical philology at the University of Basel. It was a staggering achievement. He became the youngest professor in the university's history, a prodigy destined for a glittering career. His lectures drew students, his intellect awed colleagues. But beneath the surface, Nietzsche was restless. The academy, with its rules, expectations, and rigidity, felt like a cage. He didn't want to be a scholar merely commenting on ancient texts. He wanted to be a creator, someone who challenges the present and shapes the future. His lectures grew bolder, less conventional. He spoke of the Greeks not as a dead culture but as a living example of passion, strength, and creativity. He saw in them people who embraced life's chaos, and he wanted his students to feel that fire. But this fire came at a cost. Even in his youth, Nietzsche suffered from migraines, stomach pains, and weakness, possibly inherited from his father. In Basel, these ailments worsened, often confining him to bed for days. Doctors offered no clear answers. Some blamed genetics, others overwork. Later biographers speculated he might have contracted an infection that slowly eroded his health. Yet Nietzsche refused to yield. He taught, wrote, and thought through the pain, his letters revealing a mix of youthful zeal and creeping exhaustion. He wrote to friends of his desire to leave a mark, to create something that would outlive him. In this ambition, you could already glimpse the Nietzsche of legend, the philosopher who didn't just analyze the world but dared to reshape it. By 1879, after a decade of teaching, Nietzsche made a choice that stunned his peers and family. He resigned from the university. At 35, his health was in tatters, his spirit battered by the constraints of academia. He could no longer endure its petty routines, its disconnect from real life. He felt his ideas suffocating in lecture halls, his voice unheard beyond auditorium walls. Leaving Basel wasn't just a career shift, it was a break from safety, from society's expectations. He chose freedom, but freedom came with a price. Nietzsche became an outcast, living on a modest university pension, with no permanent home. He began wandering Europe, seeking climates kinder to his frail body. Italy's warm coast, France's mild springs, the crisp air of the Swiss Alps. These mountains, with their stark beauty, became his sanctuary, his workshop, his temple. In the Alps, Nietzsche found not just physical relief but space to think. He spent hours walking mountain trails, breathing in the sharp air, gazing at peaks that seemed eternal. These walks were more than exercise, they were his dialogue with the world, with himself. He said his best ideas came in motion, when body and mind moved as one. He carried a notebook, jotting down thoughts that struck like lightning. Back in his room, he wrote for hours, pausing only when pain forced him to stop. His texts were not just philosophy, they were poetry, sermons, cries. Books like Human, all too human, began to emerge, but they found no audience. Readers found them too sharp, too far from familiar ideas. Critics shrugged, friends turned away. Yet Nietzsche pressed on, sensing his time would come, that his words would reach those ready to hear them. And so he stands on an alpine trail, the horizon stretching before him. His body weakens, but his eyes burn with purpose. He knows his path is just beginning, that his ideas will soon shake the world. But what questions does he ask these mountains? What answers does he seek in their silence? And how will a man who's lost everything find the strength to create something new? To find out, we must move forward, where his voice grows louder, and his philosophy starts to change lives. Imagine a man who's turned his back on everything: career, family, comfort, to live alone among mountains, where only the wind and stars keep him company. His body falters, his mind wrestles with pain, but within him burns a fire of ideas too radical for his time. Friedrich Nietzsche, outcast, wanderer, philosopher, stands at the edge of his greatest challenge. He's not just rejected old beliefs, he's set out to craft a new philosophy to fill the void left by their collapse. His life isn't merely a story of thought, it's an experiment, where he tests his ideas against the crucible of his own existence. But what kept him going when everything, health, friendship, hope, crumbled? And what truths did he uncover in the struggle, truths that dared to defy the world? By the early 1880s, Nietzsche lived as a nomad, drifting from one European town to another. Winters found him seeking warmth on Italy's coast, summers drew him to the cool Swiss Alps. His home was a series of modest boarding houses, his companions a stack of notebooks and a pain that never relented. Migraines gripped his head, stomach pain stole his sleep, and his vision grew weaker by the year. Doctors offered little clarity. Some pointed to inherited ailments, others to a possible infection from his youth. But Nietzsche didn't seek pity. He wrote in letters that illness wasn't just a foe but a teacher, making him cherish every lucid moment, every burst of clarity. His life was austere, almost monastic. He ate sparingly, avoided alcohol, and filled his days with walks and reflection. Yet, in this simplicity lay something grand, as if he were preparing for a battle that would define his legacy. His solitude wasn't the serene choice of a hermit craving peace. It was forced, painful, necessary. Nietzsche had severed ties with those who couldn't grasp his vision. His once revered friendship with composer Richard Wagner soured as he saw in Wagner's music not rebellion but pompous nationalism. His sister Elizabeth, once a confidant, grew distant, condemning his godless ideas. Even his dreams of love ended in ruin. He met Lou Salome, a brilliant young woman whose intellect matched his own, and dared to hope for a partnership of minds and hearts. Her rejection left him with a wound that lingered. These ruptures, with friends, family, love, weren't just personal tragedies. They were part of his path, teaching him to rely solely on himself, his will, his thoughts. He wrote, "Solitude doesn't isolate, it liberates." In that liberation, he began forging a philosophy that would become his enduring gift. His days in the Alps followed a rhythm he carved out for himself. At dawn, he'd rise, sip strong tea, and set out to walk. He trekked mountain paths, breathing the crisp air, eyes fixed on peaks that stood unmoved by time. These walks weren't mere leisure, they were his way of thinking. He said ideas came to him in motion, when body and mind fused. A notebook always in his pocket caught the thoughts that flared like sparks. Back in his room, he'd write for hours, stopping only when pain overwhelmed him. His words were more than philosophy. They were poetry, prophecy, a shout into the void. Books like The Gay Science and Thus Spoke Zarathustra began to take shape, but they met with silence. Publishers printed tiny runs, readers found them strange, critics dismissed them. Yet Nietzsche didn't write for acclaim, he wrote for truth, for a world he believed was on the brink of collapse. His philosophy was born from pain but pulsed with life. He sensed the Western world teetering on an abyss. Faith, the glue of centuries, was fading. Science promised answers but couldn't offer meaning. People were losing their bearings, and Nietzsche saw that without a new path, they'd sink into despair, what he called nihilism. He didn't just name this crisis, he dove into it, seeking a way out. His ideas were fearless, almost unsettling. He rejected the notion of a universal truth, declaring, "There are no facts, only interpretations." He sought meaning not in the heavens but in human experience. He feared that without a bold new vision, humanity would drown in emptiness, and he was determined to light the way. In these years, Nietzsche's ideas took root. He wrote that we must embrace life in all its chaos, its joys, its pains, its unpredictability. He scorned those who fled from suffering, hiding in illusions or promises of an afterlife. Life, he argued, was a struggle, but in that struggle lay greatness. His texts brimmed with vivid images. He spoke of dancing, of flames, of peaks to climb. He offered no easy answers, only a path fraught with risk but rich with freedom. His philosophy wasn't for those seeking comfort but for those ready to fight for their soul. This fight wasn't just intellectual, it was personal. Nietzsche lived as he preached. He didn't shy from his pain, didn't seek solace in religion or society. He faced his fears, his doubts, his frailty head-on. His alpine life was a test. Could he, a man of flesh and blood, embody his ideas? Could he find meaning where others saw only void? His letters from this time are a tangle of contrasts, bursts of joy at new insights mixed with despair at his isolation. He wrote of feeling like a god one moment, a shadow the next, a creator and a casualty. This duality made him human, vulnerable, yet fiercely resilient. And so he stands on a mountain trail, the sunset painting the sky. His body trembles, but his spirit blazes. He knows his ideas are more than words, they're a weapon to reshape the world. But what questions does he hurl at these peaks? What truths does he seek in their silence? And how will a man who's lost all find the strength to challenge not just himself but an entire civilization? To find out, we must press on, where his voice grows louder, and his philosophy begins to spark fires in the hearts of those who dare to listen. Picture a world where everything you've held as true turns to ash. No God to guide you, no morality to dictate right from wrong, no purpose to justify your struggles. This isn't a fantasy, it's the reality Friedrich Nietzsche saw, standing at the edge of a chasm swallowing Western civilization. He didn't just observe this crisis, he shouted about it, warning that without a new path, humanity would plunge into chaos, into emptiness, into what he called nihilism. Yet Nietzsche wasn't a prophet of despair. He was a warrior, diving into that void not to flee it but to find light. His words cut like lightning. God is dead, and we have killed him! This wasn't a celebration, it was a wake-up call, a challenge to build a new world. But what did he mean? And what path did he offer to escape the abyss? Nietzsche lived in a time when the faith that had anchored Europe for centuries was fraying. Churches still stood, but their influence waned, science rose, promising clarity but leaving hearts empty. People prayed, but their prayers grew faint, their convictions faltered. Nietzsche saw this as more than a loss of religion, it was the collapse of an entire system. Morality, values, the very concepts of good and evil rested on belief in God. When that belief crumbled, everything else began to fall, like a house of cards. He wrote that people hadn't yet grasped the scale of this catastrophe. They clung to old rules, unaware those rules no longer held. But Nietzsche looked deeper. He saw that without a new foundation, humanity risked slipping into nihilism, a state where nothing matters, where life becomes a hollow shell. His phrase, "God is dead," is perhaps his most famous, but it's often misunderstood. It wasn't a taunt or a gloat over the faithful. It was a cry of alarm, almost anguish. Nietzsche didn't rejoice in faith's decline, he feared what would follow. He wrote, "How shall we comfort ourselves, the murderers of all murderers? The holiest and mightiest thing the world has known has bled to death under our knives." These words pulse with pain because Nietzsche knew, losing faith meant losing not just God but the meaning it provided. People were left alone with the question, why live if there's no higher purpose? This question terrified him, but he didn't turn away. Instead, he sought an answer, not in the skies, not in books, but within humanity itself. To grasp how Nietzsche tackled this, we need to understand his view of truth. He believed there was no single, universal truth that fits all. He declared, "There are no facts, only interpretations." This was revolutionary. In a world where people sought absolute answers, in religion, science, or morality, Nietzsche argued such answers were illusions. Truth, he said, isn't something you find, it's something you create, shaped by your experiences, your struggles, your perspective. This meant the search for meaning wasn't a journey to a final destination but a process, one each person must undertake alone. It was daunting yet liberating. If no truth is universal, you have the freedom to decide what matters to you, what makes your life worth living. This freedom demanded courage. Nietzsche saw people clinging to fading beliefs, to a morality that no longer worked, because they feared the void left behind. He called this escapism. Instead of hiding in illusions, he urged embracing the world as it is, chaotic, painful, unpredictable. He argued that meaning comes not from fleeing suffering but from accepting it. This wasn't just philosophy, it was a dare, thrown at anyone brave enough to take it. But how do you live in such a world? How do you find light when darkness looms? Nietzsche turned to what had always moved humanity: art. He believed music, literature, and theater could express truths words alone couldn't. He saw in art a power to fill the void left by faith. He loved Greek tragedy for its ability to capture life's complexity, its highs and lows, its beauty and pain. He wrote that art lets us not just survive but triumph over suffering, making us feel more than mortal, creators in our own right. His early work, like the birth of tragedy, was steeped in this idea. Art, for him, wasn't entertainment, it was a way to touch the eternal, to grasp what makes us human. Yet even art, he soon realized, wasn't a perfect answer. He saw that in his time, it often became hollow, academic, detached from life, or commercialized, serving profit over passion. Music meant to uplift became background noise for salons. Literature meant to challenge turned safe and predictable. Nietzsche felt art, like religion, could lose its power if it bowed to the masses. He began to ask, if even art fails, what can save us? Here, his thought took a bold turn. He realized salvation lies not in the external world but within each person. Not culture, not society, but the individual must become the source of meaning. This shift was a turning point. He began urging people to take responsibility for their lives. Don't wait for God, science, or art to hand you purpose. Don't follow rules others made. Create your values, your ideals, your path. This was revolutionary. A call to become the artist of your own life, where every day, every choice, is a stroke on the canvas. But this path demanded strength, a rejection of everything that makes life easy: dogmas, morality, fear of judgment. He knew few would dare take it. Yet he believed those who did would become something greater than they ever imagined. And so he sits in his alpine room, lit by a dim lamp, scribbling these thoughts. His hand shakes from weakness, but his mind is sharp. He knows his words are more than philosophy, they're a call to action. He feels the world isn't ready, but that doesn't stop him. He writes as if his life depends on it, and perhaps it does. But what ideals will he offer the world? How will he name the person who can forge new meaning? And can he live by these ideas when his own life hangs by a thread? To find out, we must press on, where his philosophy becomes not just thought but a fire that ignites hearts. Imagine a world without ready-made answers, where every person is an artist, painting their own life's masterpiece. A world where no rules can be blindly followed, no morality simply inherited. This is the world Friedrich Nietzsche envisioned, a place of chaos but boundless potential. He didn't fear this freedom, though he knew it terrified others. He stared into the void left by crumbling truths and saw not despair but a canvas, waiting for each of us to create our destiny. But how do you become such an artist? How do you find the strength to craft greatness from nothing? Nietzsche found the answer, and it became one of the most powerful and controversial pillars of his philosophy. He called it the Superman. But who is this Superman? And why does this idea still make hearts race and minds clash? In the early 1880s, Nietzsche lived in solitude, surrounded by the Swiss Alps' rugged peaks. His life was a battle, against pain that gripped his body, against loneliness that clawed at his soul, against a world that ignored his voice. Yet in this struggle, he found not just suffering but inspiration. His notebooks overflowed with ideas that flashed like beacons in the dark. He wrote not for fame but to save himself, and perhaps the world. Books like Thus Spoke Zarathustra took shape in these years, and in them, he began forging ideas that would redefine philosophy. He felt the old world dying, and his task was not to mourn it but to build anew. This new world couldn't rely on external forces, not God, not science, not society. It had to be born within each person. Nietzsche realized that escaping the void of nihilism required not new dogmas but a new kind of human. Someone unafraid of chaos, who embraces life's complexity and creates their own values. He called this figure the Superman, or Übermensch. The word itself is a challenge, a call to rise above. But the Superman isn't a comic book hero or an invincible savior. It's an ideal, a horizon to strive for, never fully reached. It's the person who says yes to life, even when it brings pain. Who rejects the crowd's morality to forge their own path. Who lives with such passion that their existence becomes a work of art. To understand the Superman, we must see what it stands against. Nietzsche believed the Christian morality dominating Europe glorified weakness, humility, and self-denial. It taught people to suppress their desires, fear their passions, and await reward in another world. He saw this as a lie that diminished humanity. The Superman, in contrast, embraces their desires, their strength, their will. They don't shy from being themselves, even if it makes them outcasts. This isn't about cruelty or selfishness in the crude sense. The Superman's strength is the courage to live by their own convictions, unbound by others' expectations. Nietzsche painted the Superman in vivid, poetic strokes. In Zarathustra, he likened them to a dancer moving to life's rhythm, a child playing without fear of mistakes, a warrior fighting not for victory but for the fight itself. These weren't just metaphors, they were a summons. He wanted people to stop seeing themselves as victims of fate. He urged them to become creators, to make their lives more than mere survival. But this path was steep. It meant rejecting comfort, habits, and the fear of being misunderstood. The Superman isn't someone who's reached the peak but someone who chooses to climb, even when the slope feels endless. This idea sparked debate from the start. To some, the Superman was a symbol of liberation, inspiring those who yearned to live boldly. To others, it was a dangerous fantasy, justifying egoism or immorality. Nietzsche knew his words could be twisted. He foresaw they might be hijacked by those craving power over others. But his Superman isn't a tyrant. It's someone who masters themselves, their fears, their weaknesses. Someone who looks at the stars and declares, "I can be more than I am." In this striving, in this struggle, they find meaning that doesn't depend on the world. Nietzsche wrote of the Superman with a fervor that felt like a sermon. But it wasn't a sermon of faith, it was a call to action. He didn't want followers, he wanted people to live his ideas. He said the Superman isn't a distant dream, but a possibility within everyone. Anyone who dares to shed fear, who chooses to create their values, takes a step toward this ideal. But that step demands courage, a rejection of everything that makes life safe, dogmas, conformity, the need for approval. He knew few would take the risk. Yet he believed those who did would not only transform themselves but reshape the world. His own life in these years mirrored this challenge. He lived alone, battling pain that could have broken anyone. His books went unread, his ideas dismissed. He wrote to friends that he felt like a voice crying in the wilderness. But he didn't stop. He wrote as if each line were his last, as if his life hung on those words. His alpine room, lit by a flickering lamp, became his forge, where he crafted not just philosophy but a new vision of humanity. He sensed his time would come, that his words would find those ready to hear. And so he sits at his desk, gazing at the mountains beyond his window. His hand trembles, but his spirit burns. He knows the Superman is more than an idea, it's a question: what drives us to greatness? What fuels the courage to rise above? The answer he finds will become the heart of his philosophy, a spark that changes not just him but those who dare to listen. But what is this force? And how can it turn suffering into meaning? To find out, we must press on, where his ideas become not just a challenge but a beacon for those seeking their path. Imagine a person who looks at a world full of pain, chaos, and uncertainty, and, instead of turning away, dives into the storm with open arms. They don't seek shelter or shy from suffering, they embrace it, knowing it holds the key to strength. This isn't madness, it's a choice to live so fiercely that every moment pulses with purpose you forge yourself. Friedrich Nietzsche, a philosopher whose life was a battle against himself, found the secret to this choice. He called it the will to power, the force that drives not just humanity but all life. But what is this force? And how can it transform our weaknesses, our struggles, into fuel for greatness? To uncover this, we must plunge into the core of his philosophy, where pain becomes not a curse but a gift. By the mid-1880s, Nietzsche lived in a rhythm he'd carved out for himself: walks through the Alps, hours at his desk, nights haunted by sleeplessness and racing thoughts. His health was crumbling, migraines were relentless, his vision faded, and his body grew frail. Yet he refused to surrender. He wrote as if every word were his last, as if these ideas could save not just him, but a world teetering on the edge. Books like Beyond Good and Evil and On the Genealogy of Morality poured from his pen, but they met with silence. Publishers printed mere handfuls, readers found them too bold, too unsettling. Critics brushed them off. But Nietzsche wasn't chasing applause, he was chasing a truth that could awaken a sleeping world, a truth that could make us see ourselves anew. In these years, his philosophy reached new heights. He wasn't just talking about the Superman as a distant ideal anymore, he was explaining what propels us toward it. This force, he said, exists in every one of us, in every living thing. He called it the will to power. Don't mistake it for a crude hunger to dominate others or wield brute force. For Nietzsche, the will to power was far deeper, a primal drive to grow, to become stronger, to transcend ourselves. It's the urge not just to exist but to assert yourself in the world, to leave a mark, to create something greater than you are. He wrote, "The world is the will to power, and nothing besides." These words are a gauntlet, but they hold the key to what makes us alive. Nietzsche saw the will to power everywhere, in a tree stretching toward the sun, in an artist crafting a masterpiece, in a person rising after a fall. It's not about ruling others but mastering yourself, your fears, your doubts, your limitations. It's the psychological and spiritual strength to say, I can be more than I am. But this strength doesn't come easy. It's forged in struggle, in facing obstacles, in embracing pain as part of life. Nietzsche rejected the idea that suffering is something to avoid. Instead, he insisted it's essential. That which does not kill me makes me stronger, he declared, a mantra that became his battle cry. He believed suffering isn't a punishment but an opportunity. It tempers, teaches, and spurs growth. This was a radical stance, especially in a world where people sought to escape pain. The Christian morality Nietzsche opposed taught that suffering was a trial to endure for a reward beyond this life. Philosophers like Schopenhauer urged fleeing suffering through detachment or denial of desire. Nietzsche said no, embrace pain, make it your ally. Use it as fuel for your ascent. He likened life to climbing a mountain. Each step aches, each ascent exhausts, but in that effort you discover yourself. Without struggle, without resistance, there's no greatness. Without pain, there's no purpose. But how does this work in practice? Nietzsche proposed a process he called self-overcoming. It's not a one-time act but a lifelong cycle. You look at yourself, identify your weaknesses, your fears, your limits, and challenge them. You don't accept yourself as you are, you strive to be better, stronger, freer. It's not about reaching a final goal, because there isn't one. The Superman you aim for is a direction, not a destination. Every step toward it is a victory, proof you're alive, proof you choose to live. Nietzsche wrote, If we have our why of life, we shall get along with almost anyhow. Your purpose, the meaning you create, makes suffering not just bearable but valuable. His own life was a testament to this self-overcoming. He didn't hide from his pain, physical or emotional. He lived in isolation, battling ailments that could have crushed anyone. His books brought no fame, his ideas were shunned, yet he kept writing, because that was his way of affirming life. He didn't wait for the world to give him meaning, he forged it, line by line, thought by thought. His alpine room, where he wrote by faint lamplight, wasn't just a refuge, it was a battlefield where he fought for his soul. In that fight, he found joy, knowing each moment of struggle made him stronger. Yet his philosophy wasn't flawless. Critics argued that the will to power, even when turned inward, could lead to obsession, to destruction. How do you balance self-overcoming with self-preservation? What if this drive for greatness becomes a trap, consuming the self in an endless chase? Nietzsche knew these dangers. He didn't offer easy answers. He offered questions that forced reflection. He wanted each person to find their own path, their own values, their own purpose. His philosophy wasn't a manual, but an invitation to become the creator of your life. And so he sits at his desk, the mountains silent beyond his window. His body weakens, but his spirit blazes. He knows the will to power is more than an idea, it's a challenge. Can he live by his own words? Can he turn his pain into strength, his solitude into creation? And what happens if the fire within him burns too bright, consuming him entirely? To find out, we must move forward, where his life becomes a mirror of his philosophy, and his struggle a lesson for us all. Imagine a man who dared to challenge not just the world but himself, whose life became a crucible where his ideas were tested by fire, pain, isolation, and doubt. Friedrich Nietzsche, whose words shone like stars, lived as if every day was a battle for meaning. He preached the Superman, the will to power, self-overcoming, but his life was more than theory. It was a daring experiment, with himself as the subject. His struggle with illness, his solitude in the mountains, his rejected books were all part of the path he chose. But what happens when the flame that fuels genius begins to consume its creator? How did a man who championed strength face his own frailty? And what became of Nietzsche when his blazing mind began to fade? To understand, we must step into the darkest years of his life, where his philosophy met the raw edge of reality. By the late 1880s, Nietzsche was a shadow of his former self. His body, worn down by years of illness, could barely keep up with daily tasks. Migraines, which had plagued him since youth, became near constant, turning days into a haze of torment. His eyesight deteriorated, he struggled to read or write, each letter a blur. He sipped strong tea to fend off weakness, but even that offered little relief. Doctors were at a loss. Some cited hereditary conditions, others speculated about an infection from his younger years. But Nietzsche didn't seek solace in medicine. He saw his pain as more than an enemy. It was a forge shaping him, making him value every moment of clarity. He wrote in letters that illness taught him resilience, a challenge he had to meet head-on. His life in these years was stripped to its core. He lived in simple boarding houses, where his only companions were his books, notebooks, and the quiet. He shunned city noise, seeking the solitude of mountain villages. His days followed a strict rhythm, morning walks, breathing the sharp alpine air, scribbling thoughts that struck like sparks, hours at his desk, writing until pain forced him to stop, and evenings gazing at the stars, pondering humanity's fate. His letters to the few friends still in his orbit were a mix of fire and fatigue. He'd rave about life as a dance, then confess to exhaustion, to feeling his voice lost in the void. Yet even in his bleakest moments, he clung to his ideas, convinced his mission was to awaken a world asleep. His final works, like On the Genealogy of Morality and the Antichrist, were written with ferocious intensity. They weren't just philosophy. They were a roar, a defiance, a call to arms. In them, Nietzsche dismantled the morality he saw as false, one that prized submission and self-denial. He argued it weakened humanity, stifling the will to live. Instead, he proposed a new ethic of strength, creativity, freedom. He wrote of a person who embraces their passions, their ambitions, their flaws, unafraid to stand apart. These ideas were bold, almost unnerving, but they carried a passion that forced readers to pause. What if he's right? What if life isn't about being good but about being alive? This passion came at a cost. Nietzsche was living on the edge of his strength, and his mind began to falter. Friends noticed he was growing erratic. His letters turned sharp, sometimes grandiose. He wrote of himself as a prophet destined to reshape the world, but these words hinted at something troubling. He began to see himself as a figure towering above others, a bearer of new truths. This wasn't mere arrogance, it was the cry of a man whose isolation, struggle, and belief in his mission pushed him to the brink. His body and mind couldn't sustain such intensity forever. In January 1889, in Turin, a moment shattered everything. Nietzsche was walking when he saw a cart driver brutally whipping a horse. Something in that scene, perhaps its senseless cruelty, perhaps its echo of his own suffering, broke him. He rushed to the horse, threw his arms around it, and cried, "I understand you! I understand you!" Then he collapsed. It wasn't just a faint, it was a rupture. Witnesses said he wept, mumbled incoherently, his eyes vacant. Friends who retrieved him realized the Nietzsche they knew was gone. His mind, which had burned so fiercely, sank into darkness. After this, Nietzsche never recovered. He was taken to a clinic, where doctors diagnosed a mental breakdown. He spent months in a near catatonic state, silent, unresponsive. Later, his mother, then his sister Elizabeth, cared for him until the end. What caused his collapse? Biographers still debate. Some point to a progressive illness, possibly syphilis from his youth. Others suggest hereditary conditions that ravaged his brain. Some argue his mind simply buckled under the weight of his ideas, his solitude, his relentless drive. Yet perhaps his fall was more than tragedy. It was part of his philosophy. He spoke of self-overcoming, of greatness demanding sacrifice. Could his life have been that sacrifice? The irony is that Nietzsche saw no glory in his lifetime. His books gathered dust, read by a handful. He was an outcast, deemed too strange, too abrasive. He wrote that his time would come, but he didn't live to see it. In 1900, at just 55, Nietzsche passed from a stroke. His body, exhausted by years of struggle, finally gave out. But his ideas, dismissed by his peers, were only beginning their journey. They waited, like embers, to ignite in the minds of those who followed. And so he lies in his room, enveloped by silence. His eyes are closed, his voice stilled. But his words, his challenge, his vision of the Superman live on. They await those bold enough to hear, those ready to take his philosophy not as theory but as life. But what did Nietzsche leave the world? How do his ideas echo in those who came after? And what do they mean for us today? To find out, we must move forward, where his legacy becomes not just history but a call to every one of us. Imagine a voice that resonates across centuries, not asking for agreement but demanding you question, who are you? Why are you here? What will you leave behind? This is the voice of Friedrich Nietzsche, a man whose life was a battlefield and whose ideas were sparks igniting minds. His words, scorned in his time, became a beacon for those seeking meaning in a world where old truths had crumbled. He spoke of the Superman, the will to power, self-overcoming, but his philosophy isn't a relic, it's a living challenge, echoing in our lives today. After his passing, the world began to listen, and what it heard changed everything, from art to politics, from personal dreams to global movements. But what made his ideas so potent? And why, despite distortions and debates, do they still inspire us now? To understand, we must step into Nietzsche's legacy, where his voice grew louder than he ever dreamed. When Nietzsche passed in 1900, his books sat unread, his name known to only a few. He left in obscurity, never witnessing the recognition he might have craved in his boldest moments. His final years were a tragedy, his once brilliant mind silenced, his body frail, cared for by his sister Elizabeth, who often misunderstood his vision. But his death didn't silence him, it set him free. His words, too daring for his era, began to find their audience. At first, it was a trickle, artists, poets, thinkers who saw in his texts a mirror of their own quests. Then came a flood, as generations sought answers in a world where traditional anchors were fading. In the early 20th century, Nietzsche's work surged in popularity. His books were translated, his aphorisms quoted in cafes and classrooms. Thus Spoke Zarathustra became a touchstone for those craving freedom, a life of passion and creation. His concept of the Superman inspired artists like composer Richard Strauss, who wove Zarathustra into a symphony, and writers like Hermann Hesse, whose novels pulsed with Nietzsche's spirit. His call to self-overcoming resonated with those yearning to break free from society's chains and forge their own identity. But with this rise came shadows. His ideas, so vivid and open to interpretation, were twisted. Some saw the Superman as a license for selfishness, others as a rallying cry for domination. Most tragically, in 1930s Germany, his words were warped into propaganda for ideals he despised. Nietzsche, who loathed nationalism and herd mentality, became an unwilling symbol of causes he'd have rejected. Yet these distortions couldn't drown out his true voice. His philosophy endured, emerging brighter from the darkness, woven into the fabric of global culture. His ideas seeped into art, literature, psychology. Existentialists like Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus drew from his thoughts on freedom and responsibility. Psychoanalysts like Carl Jung found in his work keys to the human psyche. Even pop culture, from films to music, echoes his phrases. "That which does not kill me makes me stronger," is now a universal mantra. But Nietzsche's power lies not in sound bites, but in how he forces us to think. He doesn't offer answers, he poses questions that demand we look within. One reason Nietzsche remains vital is his uncanny foresight. He predicted the crisis of Western culture, where faith and morality would lose their grip. He foresaw the struggle with nihilism, the emptiness that follows. Today, in an age where technology gives us everything yet leaves us hollow, his words ring truer than ever. We live in a time where social media dictates thought, where success is measured in likes, and true values drown in noise. Nietzsche seems to whisper, "Stop. Don't seek meaning in the crowd. Don't wait for someone to hand you purpose. Create it yourself." His philosophy isn't about following rules, it's about rewriting them. It's about the courage to be yourself, even when the world doesn't understand. But his ideas aren't flawless. Critics argue his call to self-overcoming and the will to power can be perilous. What if the pursuit of greatness leads to burnout or harm? What if rejecting morality erodes compassion? Nietzsche knew these risks. He didn't pitch his philosophy as a one-size-fits-all cure. He wrote for those ready to bear the weight of their choices, unafraid of unanswered questions. His texts are often chaotic, contradictory, like life itself. He didn't want blind agreement, he wanted you to wrestle with him, to forge your own path. That's his strength. He's not a teacher but a guide, pointing to a door he won't open for you. His legacy is more than ideas, it's the example of his life. Nietzsche lived as he taught. He didn't flee pain or seek easy roads. He rode through rejection, created through weakness. His life was a sacrifice for his ideas, and that sacrifice made his voice eternal. He said we must die many times in life, shedding the old to be reborn. Perhaps his own life was such a death, he gave everything so his words could spark light in others. And that light burns still, in every reader, every dreamer who dares to live boldly. And so his books sit on your shelf, his words stir in your heart. They ask, Are you ready to answer his challenge? To look at your life and decide what makes it worth living? Nietzsche offers no easy path, but he offers freedom. Freedom to be yourself, to craft your purpose, to become more than you are. But how do we bring his ideas to life? How do we turn his philosophy into steps we can take today? To find out, we must move forward, where his challenge becomes not just inspiration but a roadmap to our own existence. Imagine a life where every choice you make is a brushstroke on a canvas, where each day offers a chance to create something that reflects your truest self. This isn't a life bound by others' expectations or a chase for the crowd's approval. It's a path you carve alone, through doubts, fears, and pain. Friedrich Nietzsche didn't just describe this life, he lived it, paying the price with solitude, frailty, and a relentless fight. His philosophy isn't a dusty tome or a collection of catchy quotes. It's a blazing call to become the creator of your own meaning, to embrace the challenge of being more than human. His ideas of the Superman and the will to power aren't distant fantasies but a summons to act, as urgent today as it was a century ago. But how do you take this call and weave it into your life? How do you make his words not just ideas but the pulse of your everyday? To answer, we must step into a world where Nietzsche's philosophy becomes not just thought but the breath of your existence. After Nietzsche's passing, his ideas spread like wildfire, igniting minds that sought meaning in a world where old anchors had vanished. His books, ignored in his lifetime, became touchstones. Artists found in them a spark for bold new expressions, thinkers built entire schools of thought on his insights, and everyday people discovered a flame to rethink their lives. But Nietzsche's power wasn't in offering neat solutions. He didn't want disciples trailing his shadow. He wanted you to question him, to clash with his ideas, to forge your own way. His philosophy isn't a blueprint, it's a compass, pointing you toward a direction but leaving the steps to you. Today, in an era drowned in information overload, where we're pressured to conform, his voice cuts through. Pause. Look within. Decide who you want to be. At the heart of Nietzsche's teaching is responsibility for your own life. He insisted that no one, society, religion, or science, will hand you purpose. You must craft it yourself. This is a daunting truth, because it means there's no external judge to tell you you're on the right path. But in that challenge lies immense power. Picture standing before a blank canvas. What will you paint? What values will you choose? What goals will you chase? Nietzsche taught that meaning is born in action, in choice, and the courage to be yourself. He said life isn't about dodging pain but finding a reason worth enduring it. That reason, your personal why, makes every day matter, even when it's steeped in struggle. So how do you find this why? Nietzsche suggested starting with a simple question: what makes you feel alive? It might be a moment of creation, writing, painting, building. Or time with those you cherish, or the quiet when you hear your own thoughts. He believed everyone carries a spark that can blaze if kindled. But to ignite it, you must face yourself honestly. What holds you back? What fears, habits, or others' expectations keep you from being you? Nietzsche called this self-overcoming, a process of confronting your weaknesses, your doubts, and pushing beyond them. It's not a one-time feat but a daily task, where every step forward is a triumph, a proof you're shaping your own destiny. Another cornerstone of his philosophy is embracing life in its entirety. Nietzsche urged saying yes to all life brings: joy, pain, victories, defeats. This isn't about loving every hardship but seeing each as an opportunity. Failure builds resilience. Pain sharpens your appreciation for joy. Solitude teaches you to listen to yourself. He called this amor fati, love of fate, the art of affirming everything life throws at you. It's not passive acceptance but an active choice to find value in every moment. Think of life as a dance. You can't pick the music, but you can choose your steps. In that dance, in how you meet each challenge, you write your story. But Nietzsche wasn't blind to the risks. Critics warned that his call to self-overcoming could lead to exhaustion or obsession. What if rejecting morality breeds indifference to others? He acknowledged these dangers, offering his ideas not as dogma but as a spark for those ready to bear their choices' weight. His texts are often jagged, contradictory, mirroring life's messiness. He didn't want you to nod along, he wanted you to wrestle, to create your values, your ideals. His philosophy is a conversation, starting in your soul and spilling into your actions. Today, Nietzsche's influence ripples across fields. In psychology, his focus on self-discovery fuels therapy and coaching. In art, his call to create inspires new forms of expression. In daily life, his words, "Become who you are a rallying cry for those seeking authenticity. But his legacy is more than ideas, it's his life, a testament to creating through pain, believing in the human spirit despite rejection. His existence proved that even in darkness, you can kindle light, if you choose to. And so you stand before the mirror of your life, Nietzsche's words echoing, "Become who you are." It's not the end of the journey but the start. Each day is a chance to craft yourself anew, to embrace your fate, to leave a mark. But how do you take that first step? How do you turn his philosophy into actions that transform you? To find out, we must move forward, where his challenge becomes not just a spark but a path to your own freedom. Imagine standing at the edge of a cliff, staring into an endless sky. The wind whispers questions. Who are you? What drives you? What will your legacy be? This isn't just a fleeting thought, it's the challenge Friedrich Nietzsche hurls at us all. His philosophy isn't a book to shelve or a quote to pin, it's a raging fire, urging you to seize your life with both hands. He spoke of the Superman, the will to power, self-overcoming, but it all boils down to one command: become who you are. His life, racked with pain, solitude, and defiance, proved that even in the darkest moments, you can forge meaning brighter than the stars. But how do you take his call and make it real? How do you turn his words into a pulse that drives your every day? To answer, we must leap into a life where Nietzsche's philosophy isn't just an idea, it's the rhythm of your existence. Nietzsche left us not a rulebook but a mirror. He didn't want us to mimic his path, he wanted us to blaze our own. His philosophy is a call to courage, honesty, creation. He taught that life isn't about finding pre-packaged answers but about crafting your own. Every day, every choice, is a chance to edge closer to who you're meant to be. But it starts with a quiet question you ask yourself: what makes you feel alive? Maybe it's the rush of creating, writing lines no one will read, painting colors that burst from your soul. Maybe it's a moment with loved ones or the stillness where you hear your own voice. Nietzsche believed we all carry a spark that can ignite into a blaze if we dare to fan it. Fanning that spark means facing your fears. Nietzsche said self-overcoming isn't a single heroic act but a daily grind. It's looking at your weaknesses, your doubts, your routines, and deciding, I can be more. It's not about perfection but progress, moving forward even when the path feels steep. Picture yourself before a mirror. Do you see someone paralyzed by change? Or someone ready to step forward, despite the tremble? Nietzsche taught that fear isn't the enemy, it's a guide, showing where you can grow, where you can strengthen. Each choice, to speak your truth, to start something new, to let go of old grudges, is an act of overcoming. In that act, meaning takes root. Another of Nietzsche's lessons is to embrace life in all its rawness. He urged saying yes to everything it brings: joy, pain, triumphs, failures. This isn't about grinning through every blow but seeing each moment as a chance. Defeat forges resilience. Pain sharpens your hunger for joy. Solitude tunes you to your inner voice. He called it a more fatty love of fate, the choice to find worth in every twist of your story. Life is a dance, he said. You can't choose the music, but you can choose your moves. In how you step, how you sway, you craft a tale that's yours alone. Imagine each day as a stage. Will you play it safe, following someone else's script? Or will you write a performance that's unmistakably you? Nietzsche wasn't naive. He knew his philosophy wasn't for everyone. It demands guts, accountability, a willingness to live without guarantees. Freedom, he warned, is a heavy load. When you reject others' rules, you're left alone with yourself. No one tells you you're right. No prize waits at the end. But in that freedom lies power, the power to become a creator, to live a life worth living. He said greatness isn't fame or wealth but staying true to yourself, even when the world turns its back. What does this look like in practice? Start small. Wake up and ask, what can I do today to feel alive? Maybe it's a walk where you notice the sunlight on the leaves. Maybe it's a conversation you've dodged or a line you've ached to write. These aren't just acts, they're rituals, tying you to your core. Nietzsche taught that meaning grows in motion, in choice, in daring to be you. Each decision is a step toward the Superman, the version of you that lives bolder, truer, fiercer. But his philosophy isn't just about you, it's about the ripples you create. Nietzsche believed that living by your values leaves a mark. Your courage inspires others. Your creation lights sparks in those around you. Your honesty shifts the game. The Superman isn't one person, it's a possibility in us all. When you choose this path, you don't just change yourself, you nudge the world. Not through grand gestures but through being a light in the dark, even if only you see it. And so you stand before your life, clutching Nietzsche's compass. His voice echoes, become who you are. This isn't the end, it's the beginning. Each day offers a chance to shape yourself, to embrace your fate, to etch your mark. Start with a question, what makes you alive? Let the answer guide you. Share in the comments what fuels your fire, what makes your heart race. Subscribe to keep walking this path together, because Nietzsche's philosophy isn't just words, it's a life waiting for you to live it. Close your eyes, breathe deep, and say, I'm ready.